gentlemen, welcome to Seize Your Mind, the podcast about soccer, mental toughness, and life. Today's guest is Yolanda Thomas. Yolanda comes from Sweden, where she played for the, I'm going to mess this up, the Damallsvenskan.
Damallsvenskan.
Yeah, for the Damallsvenskan. She also represented Sweden at the national level. She served as the co-head coach of the Oklahoma City FC Women's Premier Soccer League in 2015. She served as the director of the Soccer City OKC Club for 4 years. She then went to Edmond Memorial High School, where she had an amazing career of 50 wins to 11 losses.
Something like that, yeah.
And she played at Oklahoma State. I think I skipped over that part. Assistant coach for TU women's soccer, head coach for Rogers State University, and now she's the athletic director for TSC, athletic director of soccer for TSC. Whew, that's a lot. How are you doing, Yolanda?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good. So I just want to kind of get a feel of how you've gotten to where you are today. And so let's just start from the beginning. Tell me about what it was like growing up in Sweden.
Yeah, cold. No, I was born and raised in Sweden, but I'm actually also half Kenyan. So my father's Kenyan, and I actually spent quite a bit of time in both places. And my dad lived in Zimbabwe. So I actually spent a lot of time growing up in sub-Saharan Africa as well, in Kenya and Zimbabwe primarily. So I got a lot of those influences as well. But overall, I had a wonderful childhood. My father worked in the UN and my parents divorced. So my family was kind of spread out, and I got to travel quite a bit. And then I probably played every sport that involved a ball as a kid. And
Interesting.
Had fun with most of them. It was pretty early, realized I had some athletic ability and a sense for using a ball in any sport, but it was also pretty evident that soccer was kind of my thing fairly early. So stuck with that. And like,
when you say fairly early, what age you kind of talking about there?
I would say, I mean, even at like 7 or 8, I knew this was going to be my thing. I played team handball, which most Americans don't know what it is. But
I grew up in Brazil, so I know what handball is.
Okay, yeah.
It's basically like indoor soccer, but with your hands.
Yeah, something like that. So I played team handball and basketball and was pretty good in both of them, but soccer was definitely main one. I played ice hockey in the winters as well, the only girl on the team. So, but yeah, I was a lot better in soccer than any other sport. So I kind of knew, even as probably a 9-10-year-old, that was going to be my thing. I continued playing handball and basketball until I was about 14, and then really had to make a choice because there was just no way I was going to be able to keep it up. Kind of 14, 15 is when I started being on regional teams, and then eventually made the U19 national team. So at that point, I had to make a commitment time-wise and just what I was able to keep up with. And so I picked soccer and then played in Damallsvenskan, as you said, which is the highest league in Sweden. So I
murdered that.
Yeah, so I actually played, I think as a 16-year-old, my first game with seniors. So that's a senior league. And at the time it was an amateur league, but it has since evolved and is a professional league now. And I played 7 seasons in there. And then
what was your first game like for them?
So on the first team that I played on, we had 3 starters for the Swedish national team. One of them was actually the goalkeeper, who was the goalkeeper of the year after the 99 World Cup, I think. She, yeah. So, I mean, she was a stud. And I was always like an attacker or a central midfielder growing up. But when I made it into the seniors, I turned into the left back because someone got injured. And I happened to be able to use my left foot.
Okay.
So that's where I got my shot. And so I had this, senior goalkeeper yelling at me every step of every game. And it definitely made an impact on me. She was a professional in every sense of the word, and probably scared me quite a bit the first few months. But it definitely shaped what I expect out of players, out of teammates, out of players now as a coach, and how I approach defending. That's for sure.
That's great. So, she made you into a good soldier, basically.
Oh yeah, she did.
Do you remember your very first game for the national team?
Yeah, well, so with like U15s, yeah, we played very first one. I think actually we were U16. We played against Germany. So I played in all the youth levels, but I actually never never did a cup for the senior teams. I played all U15 through U21. And yeah, first time we played against Germany, and they back then Sweden and Germany were kind of the leading youth programs in terms of national teams because those two countries invested early in youth programming, whereas a lot of other countries didn't.
Mm.
So we played Germany all the time. They were better than us, though. I think they beat us 2-1 that first game. But
First game.
yeah, but all throughout kind of my youth career, especially with national team, it was kind of like us and Germany making it to the final towards the end of it. And as I became a senior, and obviously now a lot of other countries and federation have invested in women's soccer and girls soccer, so you're seeing a lot more diversity in the youth ranks as well on national team competitions. Countries doing well now that you never would have known about a few years back. So
Right.
it's great to see.
And then how did you get to the States to play for OSU?
So as a kid, so I mentioned that, obviously I had a pretty international family and had some exposure to life all over the world. I think even as a kid, I always kind of saw the whole world as a place where I could get out and do something as opposed to just continuing kind of in my local area.
Right.
And my sister, so I have 4 sisters, and the sister ahead of me, her name was Sasha, she had left Sweden to go to college in the U.S. and she went to an NAIA school in Mississippi in William Carey for 2 years and then transferred to Florida International University. And I visited her in my teens and saw the possibility of combining education, higher ed, with soccer. And although, as much as I loved playing the game, I was a pretty devoted student as well. And the circumstances in Sweden and even in other European countries, it just made it really difficult to combine elite soccer with full-time university studies. And so that's really the core at why I wanted to come to the US, and then also just kind of always had a desire to explore the world. So I was actually headed to North Carolina and I had a scholarship waiting for me there, but make a really long story short, I had some compliance issues and I was delayed a year because the NCAA deemed me ineligible. So during that time, North Carolina had plenty of talent. I think Heather O'Reilly and Tobin Heath were there at the time. So they didn't really need me, but I happened to knew somebody that knew somebody at Oklahoma State.
Okay.
And they actually filed paperwork for, I think it took 8 or 9 months to get me reinstated. And so that's how I ended up at Oklahoma State University, which, flying in, I was like, I just knew Oklahoma was like somewhere north of Texas. So I was a little apprehensive, but man, I had a wonderful experience, and Stillwater definitely became a second home, still is.
Did you play right back at Stillwater?
No. So I continued, rotating quite a bit. So I mentioned I got into the senior team as a left back. Once I got into when you join like youth national team, you're talking about the best players from every club team. Oftentimes, those best players play somewhere in the central midfield or scoring goals for their club teams. It's just the reality of where you end up putting your best player. And so you get to camp, there's like 20 out of 24 players are center midfielders in their home environments. And so I caught on to defending and zonal defending pretty quickly. So I turned into a center back, actually. So most of my youth national team career, I played center back. And when I got to Oklahoma State, I started out playing my freshman year as center back, although I think I scored 7 goals as a center back my first year. So
That's
I
insane.
took every opportunity to get forward and on set pieces. But each year I managed to convince the coach and prove that I was an asset higher in the field. So I started out as a center back my first year. Into my sophomore and junior year, I played central midfield, either as a holding midfielder or kind of a box-to-box. And by my senior year, I was actually an attacking middle striker.
So you're just edging your way up.
I did. I finished my senior year, I think, with 16 goals and led the Big 12 that year. So
Wow.
I played anywhere. But I mean, for me, I think I always was a pretty versatile player, and I was always kind of a learner and a student of the game. And I was never, even as a kid, like satisfied. And even when I enjoyed scoring goals, I'm like, I want to understand defending. I want to understand what a winger is supposed to do and whatnot. So I think that just contributed to me becoming versatile. And then being young and getting on kind of a senior team early on, you got to be prepared for whatever chance you're given. And in my case, like I said, I happened to have a left foot as a right-footed player, and there were like 3 injuries in the left back position, and nobody was comfortable on the left side. They're like, give the kid a chance, and I happened to have a good game, and that's how I got into the team. So that definitely shaped how I thought about, making sure I'm versatile.
Yeah, not many people at that young age have such a broad view of the game. They're usually stuck in their one position, and I know I was like that personally when I played.
Yeah, I think I had, like I said, being in that type of environment where I was actually training in a senior environment, and I mentioned my sister, she taught me just about everything I knew on a soccer field, and she's 5 years older. So she actually passed away after she graduated college. So, that she had a big impact on my life and how I viewed life and soccer in general. But being around senior players and players that were older, I think helped me mature in the game and then take a different approach.
Gotcha. What made you fall in love with soccer?
I don't know that
We're getting deep here. We're getting deep.
No, but I don't remember making a conscious choice. I mean, where I grew up, soccer was just on the street, and even in the summer. So I spent a lot of my summers in Kenya and Zimbabwe, and it would be 2.5 months. And my sister and I were the only girls that played soccer, but we'd bring, plethora of soccer balls with us, and not just play with our cousins, but with kids on the street that had a lot less privileges and things than we enjoyed on an everyday basis. So, we were girls, but we were the ones showing up with the real soccer balls. So it's kind of like, well, I guess we'll play with you guys. You are girls, but you do have the soccer balls. So
right.
That was kind of the bargaining that was happening on the street. So, I mean, that was another thing, you get out, if you got a soccer ball, you can make friends anywhere in the world. And so I think fell in love with it that way. I don't remember not watching soccer ever growing up. I mean, it was just part of the culture. Even as a kid in Sweden, the neighborhood I grew up in, any given day, weather is decent enough, there's kids and even big kids outside playing. So I don't recall having a choice necessarily. It was just part of the culture, and
it's what you do.
Yeah.
That's great. What got you into developing, wanting to get even better than when you were?
Yeah, so I think I had, actually remember the summer, I want to say I was 9. 9 going on 10 probably, or I just turned 9. I'm not sure. Anyway, it was a summer break, and I don't think I started playing organized until I was 7 or 8. I know right now, kids start when they're 3. But
yeah.
But I remember someone giving me a challenge of juggling, and at the beginning of that summer, I could juggle 9. By the end of it, I hit my record at 119. And that was really, I think, the period, a 2-month period, where I understood that, if I devote myself, my time and discipline and everyday action towards a goal, I can achieve it. And then, of course, throughout that process, I discovered that I have a knack for this thing with the ball. So, I had other friends who were practicing who maybe didn't improve as quickly as I did. But that is kind of I think the earliest memory of, man, if I really commit myself to this craft, then I can perfect it.
That's great. You just talked about setting goals. How do you personally set goals? Because goal setting is a big thing in soccer.
Yeah, I think I'm almost too goal oriented, probably, especially as a woman. I think sometimes I come across as a bit too task oriented, even with my female players sometimes, because women tend to be a bit more relational, and especially when you're dealing with coaching younger players, obviously they play because it's fun and it's important. But that's something I have to just remind myself, because I'm so competitive, and when I see the potential in a player, I just want to do everything I can to pull it out. But I know it's important to pull back sometimes, and let them be kids and let them enjoy things. But it is important. I mean, at the end of the day, even little kids, your parents are making sacrifices for you to be out there, whether they be financial or time or getting you to every practice. Even, when a 12, 13-year-old, when they start getting serious and they're training 3-4 times a week, there are a lot of people surrounding them that are making sacrifices. They're making sacrifices, not being with their friends, socializing, and, other things that they're missing out on. And so really about honoring that sacrifice, man. If you're going to devote that time, then maximize that time. And so for me, as a coach, as a player, as a mother, as a wife, I just want to make sure that I'm making the most of the time that I have when I'm devoting it to whatever I'm devoting it to. So I'm pretty goal oriented with not just soccer, but just life in general. even like with my kids. I mean, sometimes I have a 3 and a 6-year-old, and I've got a lot of responsibilities at work, but it's like, you know what, when I come home, they don't want Coach Yo, they want mom.
Right.
You know, so I have a goal of, you know, if I need 3 minutes in the garage, then I take it to make sure that I'm mom when I walk in the door. And so I set goals in every area of life. And for me, they function as kind of reminders of what am I working towards? I'm not just waking up and existing, but I'm actually working towards something in every area of my life.
That's great. That definitely would help you keep on track and stay focused.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, it's so easy with demands of life, or when even in the current situation, dealing with such an uncertainty with the coronavirus right now. I mean, we need things to keep us on track. And there's so many distractions in the world in general, and especially in the world we live in now, technology and just fast life, that it is super easy to get distracted. So I do believe in that. Yeah.
So do you write down your goals?
I do. I typically have like kind of yearly bigger goals, but then I break them down into monthly usually, and then kind of weekly and daily basis. So I keep kind of a reminder in my phone that I look at, and then I try to set like, you know, little habits. You know, when I wake up, I'm going to do this workout, or for me, actually, faith is a pretty big thing. So I have a rule. When I wake up, before I ever look at anything, I'm going to read a scripture, and that just sets my tone for the day. And it's easy to divert from, because sometimes you wake up and your phone has a gazillion messages on it already, you know. But so I try to set kind of like habits and daily habits that will eventually get me towards that goal. And those are typically my daily reminders. But yeah, I definitely write them down so I have something to go back and look at.
Great. All right, let's go back to your career. After OSU, what was your next step there, and what made you choose that?
Yeah, so my senior year, I actually got injured, and I knew it was pretty bad in the sense that I was in pain a lot, but we didn't really find out what exactly was wrong until the season was over, and I had a herniated disc in my back. And so I actually entered what was it called at the time, WPS draft, I think, but I ended up signing with a team back home. It was just, I was ready to kind of go home and be with my family, along with financially, it was just a better situation to go home to Sweden. So I did sign with a team back home, and then a few weeks or a month later found out that I would have to have surgery on my back. So what initially was expected to be like a 2-month recovery turned into a 6 to 9 month recovery. And so, and the other part, you know, that changed me during my college career is that I came to faith. I grew up in a pretty secular country and didn't really grow up believing in any kind of God, but definitely came to faith in Jesus while I was in college. And so that faith guided my life in a new way and definitely gave me meaning and other purpose. So when I was faced with, you know, I can't play basically for this whole year in terms of the season. And then I was in the US and kind of wanted to stay if I wasn't going to be able to go home and play. So I ended up enrolling for another degree. And I did a master's degree, and during that year served as a student assistant coach at Oklahoma State. And I think the first time I like coached a camp as a player, I was probably like 11 or 12.
Oh, wow.
I always enjoyed teaching others what I knew. So I knew I kind of had that passion. But that year of coaching with Oklahoma State, I mean, I think I was more satisfied being a coach than I ever was as a player. Just to be able to invest in someone and help them reach their goal, to me, was a lot more fulfilling than me reaching my goals. And so that was kind of birthed in me during that year, even during a very difficult time, because obviously I would have continued playing if I could have.
Right.
But that it just gave me kind of a renewed focus. And so after that, you know, I graduated a year later with my degree in my master's degree in international studies, and then had to kind of navigate staying in the U.S. and dealing with visas and things like that, which was a challenge in itself. But also following, you know, the leading of the Holy Spirit, because at this point I was pretty serious in my faith as well, and pretty dedicated at my local church, and answering the call to ministry as well. So that's how I ended up in Edmond. I took a job in a bank, worked there 9 months. 6 months into it, I'm like, I'm never doing this again. I need to coach. So I devised a plan, and I worked summer camps for like 12 weeks straight and saved up enough money to kind of make ends meet. And then I got a full-time job at Soccer City, where I honestly did a little bit of everything to begin with, but then I was a director of the Little Kickers program there, which is a child development soccer program for kids like 18 months to 12 years old, so different levels. And then I worked with Oklahoma FC um, competitive players, and then eventually at Edmond Memorial High School. So that's kind of how I got into, full-time coaching, and decided I wanted to work a job that didn't feel like work, and really be in my passion. And then during this time, I also happened to meet my husband, so got married. He's technically from Indiana, but pretty much an Okie. So got married during that time as well, and then was working pretty much full time in soccer in some fashion.
Is he into soccer too? Do you guys share that?
Not at all. Like, to this day, he can't understand offsides. It's pretty tragic. But it's funny, first kind of at face value, you'd think we don't have any similar interests, because he's like totally a band nerd. Like, he was a drum major at his school, and he's a musician and a singer. He does watch sports, but he's not very athletic. But we really do have a lot in common when you kind of sit down and get to know us a little bit deeper. And I think where we really match is his passion for music and my passion for soccer. They're the same, and we're so dedicated to our craft, both of us, and there's definitely an understanding there. So,
Gotcha.
Our appreciation for each other's passion has definitely grown over the years, even though he's kind of genius-like when it comes to music, and I like music, but I don't get it, but he definitely has learned to appreciate the sport, football, as well. So, it works out.
Kind of like the yin and yang, huh?
Yeah.
They say opposites attract. And then also, when you talked about the bank, they say if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. So That's what you chose to do, huh?
Yep, pretty much. It was definitely took a leap of faith when, we got responsibilities and bills to pay and things like that. But I haven't regretted it one bit. So.
Do you remember that moment when you're like, I'm done?
Yeah.
You do? Yeah, tell me about it.
It was kind of gradual in terms of getting the courage to like take the step, but it didn't take but probably 3-4 months. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna give this a chance, and work. And then I started looking at, okay, what could I do next? What does a career pathway look like for me? And at the end of the day, I just came back to, man, I want to coach soccer, and I don't know exactly what that's gonna look like, but I've got to commit my time, my effort, my heart where I want to be, as opposed to just paying bills just to pay bills. And so, of course, before I quit, I made a plan, like I said, and it was a grind, man. I quit basically April, May, and then I worked literally 12 weeks straight of camps and in the heat in the summer.
Oklahoma heat,
exactly,
not just the heat. Oklahoma heat.
That summer, I think, is when Good Morning America came to Oklahoma and like fried eggs on the highway and stuff.
Oh.
So, I mean, it was a grind, but it allowed me to save up enough money that, if I didn't have a full-time job offer at the end of those 12 weeks, I could, sustain for a while. So definitely worth it. And at the end of the day, it worked out.
So what was the quote unquote job hunt like to try and do that, find that next step?
Yeah.
For someone who's wanting to get there,
Yeah, it's difficult because in sports, not just in soccer, but in sports in general, I mean, you kind of often have to start off either part-time or very poorly paid. And so it's difficult, and it definitely makes it harder for people who may have other commitments. But it's worth it, and for me, it just looked like at the club I was at, Oklahoma FC at the time, I just got involved and I got to know as many people as possible. I tried to learn from as many experienced coaches as possible. I used my network of coaches I'd gotten to know mainly through my college coach and his network. And hey, you have anything? Can I work here? Can I come learn? I would go watch sessions that directors were doing so I could understand what they were doing and ask questions. And, if you show up early and you show up prepared and you have energy, even when maybe you lack skill because you're inexperienced, people take notice. And so that's what I did. And during that time of working all those camps, I met a lot of people, and I was able to, if nothing else, make an impression that I'm committed, I'm disciplined, I'm dedicated, and I'm here for the kids, And so I was able to do that, and that's really what led to the job offers that came eventually, and continue to work myself up.
That's great advice for someone who's looking to break into it. So after Oklahoma FC, let's talk about the job at Edmond Memorial,
Yeah.
and that
I
whole
really
program.
enjoyed that. We just had a lot of fun. I was really blessed in the sense that our club at OFC, a lot of our players were based out of Edmond, so all of the Edmond schools really had quality programs. So, even before I got there, man, they had some quality girls. But I think what I was able to do is bring a new view and passion, along with there's just a lack of female role models as coaches in the coaching world for female players. And so that's when girls see that, they may not have even thought about it consciously beforehand, but when they see a qualified and capable and committed coach who's also female, they go, oh, wow,
I can do this.
exciting. Yeah, And so I think that also definitely helped in getting the most out of those players. But coming from the competitive side as well of club soccer, it allowed me to have a good working relationship with our club coaches because, as I'm sure a big challenge often is how much we're taxing our players during high school season. I mean, they're training every day with their high school, playing 2 games, and then they have club practice 2-3 times a week, and then they have games on the weekend. It's just too much, right? And so when the same club coaches that I also worked with knew that I knew their club schedule, they knew mine, I knew which day I was going to train them harder, I knew which day they had club training, and being able to work with that definitely made it a more enjoyable situation for everyone involved.
Yeah.
And definitely contributed towards the success of the team as well. And then for me, really, as opposed to club, it was a way for me to really refine my skills because in the heat of high school season, you see the kids every day and you're able to really kind of imprint your way and your style and how you want them to act and behave on the field in a way that's a little bit different in club because it's just a longer period and less training. And so that was a real important part for me as a coach. I think I developed a ton during that time. And then the constant games, it just, and the atmosphere, of high school as well, dealing with the pressures and things like that,
Yeah.
definitely helped me develop as a coach very quickly in a way I think club soccer wasn't able to do for me at the time because it was spread out and less training and less pressure in games at the time. So that was an important piece in my development as a coach.
So you feel like you're able to have more influence on the team because of the environment?
Yeah. Yes, for me at the time. So that's not necessarily true for everyone, but given at the time I was pretty fresh in the club scene. So, I had second teams or younger teams and they aren't training as much. At this day and age, when you're having an elite youth team, they're training a ton. So you can probably achieve that in the club environment. But the other piece is, when you're in a high school or even a college setting, you have more control of the entire world of the student athletes. So taking that holistic approach of holding them accountable for their academics and their behavior off the field is a little bit easier in that environment than in the club environment. And so that was definitely something I enjoyed and that forced me to develop as a coach as well.
Speaking of developing as a coach, what would you do to develop leaders in high school?
And so in high school, really for me, it was about, okay, I have a clear idea of this is how I want the team to act. This is how I want you to play. But me just presenting that idea is going to make them do it. So I had to use kind of exercises to help them internalize it. So I think for me personally, I worked pretty hard in observing and figuring out, who are the leaders of the group even before I appoint them. So naturally, there tend to be leaders in the group and people who teammates listen to. And so winning those people on board first is important, and then empowering them to sell your ideas to the rest of the group. And then really kind of allowing the players to ask questions, why are we doing this? What is the purpose of this? So that they have an understanding and they're just not just robots out there. Because at the end of the day, in training, when you're first introducing something, you can definitely be direct. In this moment, this is what we do, period. You can introduce it like that, but if they don't start to begin to understand why, when they're faced with that moment in the game, they can't make the decision themselves. And so really, I wanted to create an environment in which players could own the decisions themselves and give them the information so that when they encounter difficulties in games, they have the tools to solve them as opposed to just looking to the sideline, coach, what do we do now? And so that was kind of along the lines of what I did, allowing them influence, allowing them to ask questions, presenting maybe, hey, this is how I want it to happen in this area of the field. How do you think we can achieve that? So inviting them into the problem solution process as well. but then also doing social things. I mean, kids are social. They play soccer because they love it, just like I do and did. And so doing fun things, keeping it fun, keeping it light, you know, goofy things.
Can you give examples?
You know, in training, silly warm-ups, like I think of some games of the, but just silly warm-ups to keep them laughing, technical things, you know. You'd be amazed, even 22-year-olds enjoy playing head catch, you know. I mean, I've done that warm-up with my college team before a game, and we played well. So, I mean, you know, just keeping things light. But then also at Edmond, we had a Soccer Sisters program that those kids absolutely loved. So it was like Secret Soccer Sisters, and all season long they're trying to figure out who their secret soccer sister is, and every week they give them some kind of gift that is some kind of clue and whatnot. And it just creates community and a way for them to connect, and a lot of times some of the olders to connect with the younger players as well. And so yeah, just little things like that. We did also, I actually had one year I had them read a book on leadership that we worked out of. So we did that mostly in the preseason, but it was a friend of mine ran a similar program on leadership. And so I used the book there that has basically a leader's guide and a student guide. And we went through it together of, you know, how do we want our players to act? How do we want our leaders to act? What is your responsibility? And making sure the culture on this team is right and things like that. So we worked out of that workbook as well during the off season.
And that sets clear boundaries. Like, if you spell it out like that, you know, someone can't be like, oh, I didn't know.
Yeah. No, that's the key. If you're going to hold players accountable to something, you have to give them the expectations. So setting clear expectations is important. But then also to get buy-in, you've got to allow players some influence. You know, as a leader, you definitely come in and you have an idea of the culture you want, the environment you want to create, and how you want to play. But at the end of the day, it's not just you. You know, you're leading the team, but they've got to make the action. So you've got to allow players to have input in the details of how that gets carried out and invite them into that process.
So what made you leave high school?
During that time, I mean, I think I always just kind of wanted to coach as good a players as I could, you know, as high level as I could. Obviously, I you know, excelled as a player quite well and got to a pretty high level, and I think took that same passion and drive into coaching. So it wasn't that I didn't want to coach high school, but really at that time I actually got a call from the University of Tulsa and got offered an assistant position, and so saw my chance to get into college coaching. And at the time, to be honest with you, it did not make financial sense for me to leave my multiple jobs in Oklahoma City and come to Tulsa. But again, you know, sometimes you've got to make a temporary sacrifice for a long-term positive outcome. And we did, my family did. We moved up to Tulsa, and I was an assistant at the University of Tulsa for 3 years and really enjoyed that. Getting back into the college environment was really fun. Getting to work with players at the college level. So it was really just kind of part of career advancement. When
you were with Oklahoma State, did y'all have rivalry with Tulsa at all? Did y'all play each other at all?
Really. I know we played them in the spring season because I remember playing at that field, but we didn't play in the regular season. And I think at the time, TU was fairly young as a program still, so there was probably a bigger gap in quality than there is now. I mean, since I've been there, we've played Oklahoma State in this fairly even game. So, whereas at the time, I don't believe it was. So.
Gotcha. But you didn't sought out University of Tulsa. They came to you just like out of the blue.
Yeah. So, Coach Cousin there had I had gotten to know him through working camp with my coach at Oklahoma State University. And so we would see each other, you know, every so often, and he always mentioned, hey, you know, I'd like to bring you to TU, but they previously only had a GA position open. And I was like, well, I already got my master's degree. I need a real job. And so when they got the funding to add a full-time third assistant, he just gave me a call. And I was like, yeah, I'll come on. And so I went through the interview process, but yeah, it was, again, one of those things, man. You show up and you show yourself faithful and willing to work, people take notice. And when opportunities open up, they'll give you a call. So, yeah.
That's great. That's very important. What was the biggest thing you learned at University of Tulsa?
I don't know that I can say one thing. I think kind of that reintroduction into college sports, and obviously for me as a professional, I was older and more experienced. Just the holistic approach of, you know, you've got to connect with the person, the player, the student, every piece of baggage that they bring in when they come to you. You know, the player that you recruit is not the player that shows up, not in a bad way, but because when you're recruiting them, they're showing you as much good as they can. And
Yeah.
we all have deficiencies, we all have baggage, we all have, you know, shortcomings, and when they arrive and it's just them and it's all of them, that's what you get, you know, in the college level. And so just understanding that whole picture and making sure you meet the needs of your players as people and as students, and not just as players, it's so important to the success. And at the end of the day, you know, especially when they're coming from afar, you're their lifeline. You're a lot more than just coach to them in a lot of aspects. And so I think just taking that in and kind of formulating, you know, hey, this is something I like about the way we do things at TU. Maybe if I get a chance in the future, this is something I would do differently. So just to help me kind of shape, you know, my philosophy and what I wanted to implement as I moved into a head coaching role, wherever that would be. And those are kind of notes I took. But yeah, so I think it wasn't really one thing. It was just kind of that growing my understanding of the needs of the college athlete.
So how'd you get to Rogers State?
So that's another one, actually. The previous coach, Coach Parkos, got Parkinson that was there, was another kind of associate. So he went to college at USAO and was connected at OFC in Oklahoma City as well. And when he started out coaching, and so we didn't know each other very well, but you know, you figure out each other. I knew him as a hard worker. He knew me as a hard worker, and just kind of kept in touch. And obviously being college coaches, albeit in different levels, you know, our paths would cross while I was at TU. And so I really wasn't looking for a job. I was still at TU and I was happy and doing well. And Parko gave me a call and said, man, I'm probably going to be leaving. And if I do, you should apply for my job. And so I was like, what? and he took a job in the NWSL with Utah Royals, and I entered the process at Rogers State. And honestly, it kind of came out of nowhere. I was not looking to leave TU. I was really enjoying the work we were doing there, and my family was happy and whatnot. But when you get a potential head coaching position opening, I mean, I just had to take a look at it, and then went through that process, and yeah, that's where I ended up, got the job, and I was really excited. And Claremore is it's a neat place. It's a fun place and a lot of good people. And so I really enjoyed my time there as well.
What was it like being head coach for the first time?
You know, I don't think it was like, for me at that stage of my career, it wasn't that big of a step in terms of like going from assistant to head coach. And probably because I had sole responsibility at the WPSL level before, at obviously the high school level before, but also credit to Coach Cousin and Coach Ryan at TU. Man, they let me do whatever I was willing to do. And that, you know, I know a lot of college assistants that they do everything behind the scenes, but they never get to like give tactical team talks. They never get to run training. You know, their input is maybe considered. I mean, Kyle and Jim were very much like, man, we want to help you. And what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And of course, I didn't always go my way, but like they valued my input and they trusted me to run pieces of training and to make changes and make adjustments. And so I felt pretty well prepared based on my experience there and previous experiences. But then also, I think during time, even outside of soccer, I had invested in developing my leadership skills. So whether that was kind of in a professional environment, away from soccer, or, you know, in a management or office setting at Soccer City, even through the bank, but also within my church. My husband and I rose to leadership within my church as well. And so picking up those lessons along the way definitely made it seamless to me. And so if anything, I think I was just like ready to go to work more so than being nervous.
Gotcha. Was when you went in there, you did not recruit that year, correct? Had the team already been recruited for you?
Yeah, so they had been signed pretty much the majority of the class, but I think I added 2, maybe 3 that year in pretty short span. By the time I got there, the way recruiting worked at the time, they had already signed their letters of intent. So I didn't have to do a ton of the recruiting, but there was some scholarship money available. And obviously sometimes, players leave if their coach leaves or whatever. So I did add 2 or 3, I think, that first year, and then mostly recruited for the next year.
Gotcha. And while at Rogers State, what do you feel was the biggest thing you brought that kind of changed the way things were being done in the women's program for the better?
Well, I think the really big positive in coming to RSU is the transition, even though, girls may not have seen it, because I knew the previous coach, he helped me out a lot. So, hey, this is what we've done. This is what we haven't done. This is why this looks like this. Or, I could call him and say, hey, tell me about this recruit. Why did you decide on her? What is she good at? What is she not good at? So, I mean, it was a lot more than just coming in and here's your team and you don't know anything about what's happened. So that helped. But I think to answer your question, you have to put in context that the 2 years before I got there, there was a coach who had a lot of success, or I should say one season of very good success. The previous one was kind of the first year of turning things around. Prior to that, they had 5 seasons of really bad losing. And so there was a lot of transition. And when he got there, he had to recruit really out of JUCOs to get kind of an immediate influx. So even though I inherited some of his recruits, there were a lot of 2-year players. And so there was a lot of turnover in terms of personnel in the team. And so it was at a kind of pivotal point where we could say, okay, at this point, the program is now well known enough and respected locally that we can actually start to recruit 4-year recruits locally and still get talent and compete with local competitors. Whereas prior to that really wasn't the case. And so I got to be part of that transition and really get in some kids that, could be 4-year players, 4-year contributors, and also actually compete with competing universities in our state and in our region, whereas previously that wasn't really the case. So I think being part of that transition and beyond, wins and losses, just establishing the program as, this is a place where players should go. And club coaches in the state of Oklahoma, North Texas, and surrounding areas would actually know who this school is. And so I think that's where I picked up the torch and was able to do. And so now, even with the next coach, whom I also was able to hand things over to pretty well, he can show up and people go, oh, that's Rogers State. Whereas prior to me, that just wasn't the case, and so I that was not my own doing. It was a collective effort, but I think that was kind of the pivotal change that isn't necessarily associated with wins and losses, but definitely with kind of the culture and long-term trajectory of the program and even the university. And so I think that was a kind of the pivotal moment in which we were as a team. The other piece was developing an identity and style of play, because prior to that, because of kind of needing immediate wins and being not being able to be too picky in recruiting because of the lack of results in the past and interest of the program. Whereas when I picked it up, I could go, I don't only need a right back, I need that right back. And, this is how we want to play. And so I think the previous coach was a lot more pragmatic in, we're just going to do what we need to do to get 1 or 2 wins here and there, And I respect that and probably would have done the same had I came in when he came in. But by the time I got there, we had more players that could grasp and also be there for 4 years and internalize the style of play. So I think those were kind of 2 pivotal things that I was able to start working towards. Obviously, I ended up only being there 2 years, but I think even now when I talk with a lot of the girls who are there or who have graduated, a common thread that I kind of get is that they now think about what is my philosophy about soccer. And so that's something I wanted to leave them with, and that I know the coach before me definitely had those goals and in terms of his own vision and philosophy of soccer, but because of the state of the program, maybe wasn't able to focus on those things as much. And so I think those were key. And then I think him, myself, even the current coach, there's always been and continues to be a focus on not just athletics, but the whole student athlete, making sure that when they go there, when parents drop their kids there, they know that there are people who care for them as people and care about their success on and off the field, socially, emotionally, academically, all of the above. And I think that's true for the university as a whole, the athletic department as a whole. And that's definitely something I bought into while being there.
Tell me about Fortuna. I'm making you talk a lot. I know. Oh, look at that.
What was that, 2 years ago? I actually played WPSL. So I played the first year Fortuna was a franchise. And I mean, it's just like, I'm just a lifelong lover and learner of the game. And so I had 2 kids and I was like, man, let's get back out there. So I got out there and played, and it was really fun because probably like 70% of the team I had coached at some point, whether when they were kids or, you know, even in high school and college. And so ton of fun, got to play again. And there were some new people that had invested in that franchise in the city of Tulsa. And so I got to know them playing. The next spring, they asked me if I'd coach the team because I was ready to not play. And so I ended up coaching the team. And anyway, so I mean, it's a ton of fun. I think Tulsa has actually produced a ton of talent over, you know, the last 10, 15 years. And I don't know, about 80-90% of our roster were Tulsa-based players. So to get them back together, and these are, you know, grown women with careers, but that have grown up together, and some are obviously still in college, but it was really neat for them to come back and play together as well. And like I said, myself and a few others, I mean, I had one of my OSU teammates, so she's, you know, not that much younger than me. She was also playing, and so we got to play together again. And some of the other players on the team had also coached some of the girls when they were little, whether in camp settings or, you know, academies or what have you. So I think it was a good, like, celebration of soccer and of women's soccer in the state.
Like family reunion.
Yeah, it really was. And then also just, I think that's an area in which the United States is still lacking. Like, you don't have to stop playing soccer just because you finished college, you know, and I mean, in a lot of places in Europe and South America, or everywhere around the world, really, like, you have leagues at every level. And grown people with lives and careers and families are still playing competitive soccer in the sense that it's organized and people compete, but, you know, it's a lower level to where it's obviously not elite. And so I think we're really missing that model in the United States in terms of remaining, you know, lovers and learners of the game and creating a culture of, man, we all get out and play. And so in the absence of that, I think the WPSL really functioned as an opportunity for women to keep playing and share their love for the sport.
How was your how many years were you at Fortuna, or are you still with them?
So I'm still with them. Yeah, obviously right now we don't know if the season's going to happen, but yeah, so I've coached them 1 year. And I mean, of course it helped that we had a ton of success. We didn't lose a game until the final game of the year. So, and that was the regional finals, and we were top 8 in the nation.
That's amazing.
Out on the final 4. I mean, yeah, it really was amazing. And so, anyway, so I was a head coach for 1 year, and I'm the appointed head coach right now. We don't know what's going to happen with the WPSL season at this current time, but yeah, the plan is to play another season, and then we'll see, obviously, after this.
So how did TSC recruit you?
So so that same ownership group of Fortuna ended up taking over ownership of Tulsa Soccer Club, the youth club. And so had you asked me probably a year ago if I would consider going to full-time club soccer, I'd been like, nah, you're crazy. So I just, I really had not considered that. Not because, I mean, not because I necessarily had a bad thought about it, but because I was just kind of tunnel vision on, man, I'm enjoying this college thing. I'm having success. I want to grow in this area and see where it takes me, kind of. And so I really hadn't thought about it. They kind of brought it up like at the tail end of the season, you know, hey, we're kind of in this process of probably acquiring the youth club. There might be some opportunities here. And I was like, dude, it's August and I'm thinking about college. Like, I'm not thinking about a new job. I'm getting ready to go into grind, you know? And so we really didn't talk about it a whole lot more, but I did complete my USSF B license during that time. And part of that process as well definitely made me think about philosophy and who I want to be as a coach and a leader and what I want to stand for. And ultimately at the end of college season, when we sat down and actually had a serious conversation about, you know, what would me moving into a full-time position at a youth club look like, there were a couple of things that won me over. The ability to impact as many players as possible in a positive manner is greater when you're working in a club setting than with one college team. Another thing.
So how many kids do you oversee at once? Like,
I've got to count them. I mean, we've got over 1,000 kids in the club, so there's a lot of them. Obviously, they're boys and girls in different levels, but there's a lot. So that
A lot more than a roster of 26 to 30.
Yeah, a lot more. But the other piece is so I obviously had a pretty elite upbringing in soccer, and was at the elite level at a young age. But during that time, so the current manager of the Swedish national team, Peter Gerhardsson, and his assistant Magnus Wikman, they were my high school coaches. Pia Sundhage, who is a Swedish coach who was the coach of the U.S. women's national team and won the Olympics and second in the World Cup. She was my U18 national team coach. Anna Signol, who has coached the Scottish women's national team, was my U15 through U17 national team coach. I've had another one, Per Vidén, who was my club coach for several years growing up in Sweden, is now the technical director of the Swedish Federation. I wasn't thinking about this when I was a kid, but I'm realizing that my experience was elite in every aspect of the word.
Right.
And so as I kind of started noticing these college players, my expectation of what they ought to know by the time they got to college was a lot higher than what I felt they knew. And that wasn't, it wasn't just my players at RSU or my players at TU. It was just evaluating the state of the college game. And so for me, I say, when a kid is 18, 19, they're pretty set in their habits. And so what can I do to help influence that kid when they're more impressionable at 8, 10, 12, 14, create good habits so that they can maximize their potential and be better players by the time they get to college. And so that was another thing that had kind of been brewing in me for a while. And I don't think I thought a ton about it because at the time I was like, well, for now I'm in college, that's what I'm doing. But with this opportunity coming along, it definitely made me go, wait, I could actually make an impact here. And so that was definitely something that I was like, oh, this is real now. I can think about this. And then, the new ownership group definitely had some goals and ideals of creating an academy that had a unified curriculum and that relates not just to what's happening on the field, but the type of young leaders that we raise up that definitely enticed me, and I've been part of shaping that. So we were interrupted by the coronavirus, but I'm looking forward to
just put on pause for a little bit.
Yeah.
Gives you more time to plan out better for one team.
Yeah, basically. So I'm getting excited about, implementing some of those things going into the fall and being part of a work that really, when you're working with youth player development, you don't get to see immediate results. I mean, you can get to see some players have some success, but in terms of like big goals, you really don't see the results until 3, 5, 7 years down the road. But being part of such a big project is really exciting and something I believe in, and I'm excited to see the result and a chance for my family to get rooted in Tulsa as well. I mean, we really enjoy it here. My kids have grown up here, and it's a way for me to serve my communities, to be honest with you.
So you're planting seeds for a forest.
Yeah.
Of soccer players.
And the other thing is, I mentioned it earlier, there's still a lack of female coaches, but in college coaching compared to club coaching, we are very well represented. I went to a coach symposium for the ECNL, the Elite Clubs National League, in January in Las Vegas. And out of like 350 participants, 9 were female. And this is, a league that is all over the country and producing all the elite players. And the pressures on 14, 15, 16-year-old young girls when they're competing and trying to get Division I scholarships, I mean, they're immense. And they need women as part of that leading as well. And so there are tremendous men out there doing the effort of leading and guiding these kids, but that representation matters. And that's another thing where, it's not always easy, but I think it's important that someone takes that step. And I wish I would, I shouldn't say I wish, I had a lot of those role models, but I'm realizing that's not the case for a lot of girls out there. So.
Well, I'm glad you've stepped into that role and are continuing to do so.
Appreciate it.
I'm sure Tulsa is much better for it, and I know you're inspiring a lot of kids, and soon you will have a beautiful forest.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a good place to stop. I just want to say thanks for coming on the show. You dropped tons of knowledge. I really appreciate it, and maybe we'll have you on again sometime in the future.
All right. I really appreciate it, Brandon. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Yolanda. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.